This is everyone's favorite Parsha podcast of the year. It's the Parsha podcast that coincides with the annual Torch fundraiser. The fundraiser for 2025, which is happening right now, it's a matching fundraiser, which means that every donation is doubled. You can access this fundraiser at givetorch.org. You'll find the link in the description if you enjoy the Parsha podcast. If it enhances your connection with the Almighty and His Torah, now is your chance to partner with me, to partner with us at the Torch Center in ensuring that the Parsha podcast continues to flourish throughout 2025. It's very important to me that everyone participates. They go to the website, givetorch.org. You'll find the link in the description. I asked everyone to give what they can give to join this venture, to support the great work of the Torch Center, and of course, your favorite podcast, the Parsha podcast. Now, every year, I like to do some new gimmick, some way to persuade people who may be vacillating, waffling. Should I donate? Should I not? Let me just hit fast forward. This will end the promo, the pitch. So every year I try to do something a little bit different, creative, to try to elicit 100% support. So of course, you know that I have a newsletter, and every week I try to send out an essay on the Parsha, work really hard on it. And then during the fundraiser, we also put in some fundraising emails. And I always think about the titles, the subject lines. And as the campaign progresses, it gets a bit more dramatic over time. My colleagues always joke. They're always confident that we're going to make our goal. On the website, givetorch.org, we have a goal for what we want to raise this year. And this year it's the same as last year. You know, where we understand the economy is tough. It's the same as last year. But there's a point in time in the fundraiser every year where I'm convinced. I said, we're trying to reach too high of a goal. We're not going to make it. And I'm kind of there right now. So I always try to write some copy for the year's emails. And there's a little bit of a downside to donating early, because once someone makes a donation, I have setting a tag in my email list that says, okay, don't bother them with any more fundraising emails until next year. So once someone makes a donation, they're like, why did the rabbi send only one email? No. I sent lots of emails. You were just smart and you made a donation ahead of time. So I spared you the suffering of having to go through all these emails. But it's a little bit of a downside. You know, the upside of donating early, givetorch.org, every donation's doubled. It's happening right now. The upside is that you won't see any more emails. The downside is that you won't get to see some of the new gimmicks and tricks and schemes crafted for this year's fundraiser. So if you already made a donation and you still want to see the emails, let me know and I'll remove that tag. So one year, I decided, you know what? I'm pulling all the stops. I'm going to do something unprecedented. A terrible idea. I'm going to regret it, but I'm doing it nonetheless. I told everyone, I said, take out your phone, go to your contacts app, put in my name, and I gave them my email address that you know, rabbiwolbe@gmail.com. And then I gave them my cell phone number. And I said, you could spam me, bombard me, but if you're unsure whether or not you should make a donation, put in my number, go to your messaging app, and type in a message to me. I need to be persuaded. And I said, it's going to be terrible. People are going to bother me. And what, you can't give your cell phone number out. But it's fine. You know, most people don't even call, right? You know how this works. I'll give it again. I don't care. 713-301-3611. Most of you already have it. That's fine. But every year I also like to release a lot of new episodes to coincide with the week of the fundraiser, week or 2 weeks. And every year I make a long-winded appeal on the podcasts. But I feel like for the Parsha podcast, I don't need to pull any gimmicks. More than any other show that I'm privileged to host, the Parsha podcast is like a family. And I think everyone who's part of this understands the value that we provide from the Torch Center in Houston, Texas. And I think they also understand, certainly someone who's been a listener for some time. You understand the effort that we invest in this initiative. And I've never spoken to someone who listens, who participates in the Parsha podcast, who doesn't appreciate it and doesn't want to support it. So I felt this is like an easy pitch. Support the Parsha podcast in 2025. Go to givetorch.org. Link is in the description. See? That was easy. Let's get on with the show. It's Parshas Tetzaveh. We had last week Parshas Teruma, and we're learning about the tabernacle, a mobile temple that can be deconstructed and reconstructed with the nation as they travel. This is the forerunner, the precursor of the Holy Temple, the permanent temple that was built in Jerusalem. And last week we read about all the different vessels, or many of the vessels needed for the temple, and the different components, the different materials that it's made out of, and how it's made, very detailed instructions. This week we continue. We read about some of the vessels and some of the operations of the tabernacle/temple. But specifically, the bulk of the Parsha deals with the garments of the priests, but the high priest specifically. The priests are going to run the temple and the tabernacle. And there are very specific guidelines as to what they must wear. They cannot do any service in their jeans, in a polo shirt. You have to wear exactly what the Torah outlines, and it goes through the 8 vestments, the 8 garments of the high priest, but it starts off with the menorah, and it must be lit from first pressed, virgin, clean, pure olive oil, and you have to light it every night. And then we read about the garments of honor and splendor, the garments of the high priest, the 8 special garments that Aaron, the high priest, would wear. And it begins, of course, with the Ephod. The Ephod is an apron-like garment that attaches on the shoulders with the 2 shoham stones, and it has the chain that connects to the choshen, which is one of the other 8 vestments, garments of the high priest, which is the breastplate. And of course, inlaid in special brackets, golden brackets on the breastplate, there's 12 gaps or 12 spots, 12 slots. And in those 12 slots are 12 precious stones that are outlined in our Parsha. And upon each one of those 12 stones, it states the names of the 12 sons of Jacob, the 12 tribes of Israel. On the shoulder pads of the ephod, the apron, you have 2 more stones, so a total of 14 stones. These 2 are known as the Avnei Shoham, the Shoham stones. Why are they called the Shoham stones? Because Shoham is the type of stone that they are made of. And on these stones, you also have the names of the 12 sons of Jacob, but you have 6 apiece on each one of these 2 shoulder pad stones. I want to get warmed up with a nice idea. Maybe it's a bit topical for what's happening right now at the Torch Center in Houston, Texas. That's okay. You'll forgive me for that. If you looked at the breastplates, the breastplate of the high priest, it had a golden bracket. Gold is very precious. As you may know, gold is now very expensive also. It's like at an all-time high. It's very desirable. But what happens when you have a precious stone, one of these 12 very expensive precious stones? The Talmud tells a very dramatic and famous story about a time when they lost one of the 12 stones. They lost the stone of Benjamin, the last of the 12 stones. And there was one Gentile, Dama ben Asina, who had this stone, but the key to the safe was hiding under the pillow of his father who was sleeping. You remember that story? And the Talmud tells us that the value of this stone, there's 2 opinions, either was 600,000 gold coins or 800,000 gold coins. These are very precious stones. So gold is precious, but what's even more precious than gold? These stones. So what do you have over here? You have a setting. Gold is now secondary to the stone that is inlaid in that setting. So yes, gold is very valuable. But what's even more valuable is the stone, and thus the gold becomes secondary, it's like a setting. It's only the basis upon which something even more valuable, even more cherished, even more precious and desirable is placed. So the Rebbeinu B'chai makes a fascinating observation. You have the gold, it's precious, but there's something even more precious than that, and that's what's placed upon it. The stone. But the stone is actually also a setting. It's also a basis, a setting for something else. What is on top of those stones? On top of those stones are letters. Letters that are the letters that make up the Torah. And Rabbeinu B'chai, one of the great commentators on the Torah, he cites a verse that says the Torah is more precious than pearls and other valuable gems and stones. So you have stones more valuable than gold. And what's more valuable than these precious stones? That is the Torah. And then he tells us a very powerful lesson. Torah, the letters that make up the Torah. It's the most powerful thing in the world, the most desirable and cherished thing in the world. You would take your gold to acquire something even greater, namely a stone. And you would take all your stones, all your precious gems, to acquire a little bit of Torah. And he impresses upon us that ultimately our goal in life should be, why are we amassing money, gold? Why are we amassing precious materials, stones? It's all there ultimately to try to advance the cause of Torah. And I think this is a nice idea, but it's more broadly applicable. We each have gifts. We have talents. We have abilities. We have skills. We have strengths. And the Torah always encourages us. Whatever we have, try to funnel it towards God, towards Torah, and towards deepening our connection with our soul and our eternal selves. There's a very famous verse in the beginning of the Shema, the declaration of our values, of our allegiance to God. You should love Hashem your God, b'chol levavcha, with all your hearts. It's always translated incorrectly as with all your heart. No, it's with all your hearts. Why? I only have one heart. No, you have two. The Talmud tells us. You have the good heart and the bad heart. The Yetzer Tov, the good inclination, and the Yetzer Hara, the bad inclination. And both of them you have to channel towards God. The good things you have, the bad things you have, everything that you have, find a way to channel that towards the thing that's even more precious than pearls. That's even more precious, of course, than gold. That is, of course, the Torah and what it's supposed to bring us towards. And I said here, to get us warmed up on the Parsha, let's go to the second idea. We have 14 stones in total. And the Torah tells us, chapter 28, verses 17 through 20, the names of the 12 particular stones that go into the choshen, into the breastplate. And the first one is for Ruvain. It's called Odem. And of course, the translation may be a word. I looked up the translation. It's carnelian. I don't know what a carnelian is, but I'll just accept it. Odem. And then there's Pitda, which is a chrysolite. I don't, again, I'm not much of a stone collector. But it goes through one by one by one, the 12 different stones that correspond to the 12 tribes. Now, the penultimate stone, the second to last stone, the identity of the stone is a shoham, which, again, I looked this up. The translation that I found on Sefaria is a lapis lazuli, which I thought was a hysterical word. I don't know what that means. Is that really a thing? Or it's some sort of prank? I don't know. It's a shoham stone. That's the type of stone. Now, you may recall that there is shoham stones that go on the shoulders of the Ephod. So we have 14 stones, but 3 of them are shoham stones. One shoham stone goes in the second to last bracket on the breastplate, and 2 more shoham stones on the shoulders that each have 12 names of the 12 tribes. So it's 6 and 6, one on each shoham stone. So that's interesting. Now, to make it more interesting, who is the second to last son of Jacob? That, of course, is Joseph. Joseph was born 11th, and Benjamin is the only one that's younger than him. The shoham stone is the stone upon which it says the word Joseph. So Joseph, his stone, there's 3 of them. One in the choshen, the breastplate, and 2 more on the 2 shoulders, inlaid in the ephod. Now you perhaps recall, Joseph had a near miss with Miss Potiphar. This is going back to Genesis. Joseph was a slave in Egypt, and his master's wife really liked him, and she wanted to be with him and wanted to sleep with him, and he resisted and he pushed back. And our sages tell us something fascinating. There was a day where Joseph was about to capitulate. He was going to yield. He was going to succumb to the temptations. And with his last bit of effort, he did something Herculean on a spiritual level. He conjured an image, a hologram of his father who appeared to him in the window and told him something and threatened him. Don't do what you're about to do. And if you recall, there was a very specific threat. And the threat related to the shoham stones. The threat goes, this is what our sages tell us, that this hologram of his father told him, in the future, my 12 sons will be 12 tribes. And they'll burgeon into a great nation. And they'll have a high priest who does service in the temple and the tabernacle. And he's going to wear an ephod upon which there's going to be 2 shoham stones. And right now it says your name, Joseph. But if you do the sin, you're off. You're booted. You're out. And instead, you'll be called a patron of harlots. Do you want to do it? Even someone with a lot of pulsating hormones, you're threatened like that. For hundreds of years, you'll have to live with the ignominy of being, instead of one of the great heads of a tribe of Israel, you're going to be the disgraced son that became a patron of harlots. That was enough to get Joseph to overcome, even though it meant spending 10 years in the slammer. So I find it very interesting. Joseph, he is the shoham stone. And all of his peers, his brothers, his contemporaries, they're all placed on his stone. Joseph is almost like a hybrid, our sages tell us, of a forefather and a head of a tribe. He's the only one of Jacob's sons whose sons were also tribes. Because Ephraim and Manasseh were both sons of Joseph and tribes of their own. So Joseph is like the glue that connects the 3 patriarchs. He's like a half patriarch. And the tribes, he's like a half tribe. He's like an in-between. And that's why it's his stone specifically that's the shoham stones on the shoulders of the high priest. What I find most interesting about this is that Joseph was given 2 options, and both of them were very extreme. If he were to overcome this temptation, he would be the embodiment of righteousness. And his whole family, all of his brothers, will be beneath him in stature. They'll be on his stone. And if he were to fail, not only would he lose that supreme exalted stature, he will be booted from the stature of his brothers. He'd be like the Esav of that family, ostracized from his peers, from his siblings forever. Joseph had 2 options. There was no option for him just being one of the sons of Jacob. That's not an option. It's either you're the one, it's your stone on the 2 shoulders, or you're not even one of them. You're out. You're the patron of harlots. He was either going to be the most exceptional exemplar of the family, someone who exudes perfection and greatness and holiness, or he's the black sheep who was excised from the family. Joseph had high variance. And I suspect that each one of us have a little bit of this calculus as well. My grandfather, bless me, used to always say that we each have one part of our personality that's completely righteous. That's like Moshe. It's like perfect. And then we have a flip side of one part of our personality that's like Bilam. It's like the worst of the worst. There's one point within each one of us that where we have total greatness, and there's another point where we're just totally corrupt. And those two are almost opposites of each other, but they could be exchanged for each other. The area of our greatest strength and potential, it's very close to the area that we can falter the worst. Jewish people could not have had the golden calf if they weren't at Sinai. It's not possible. If the nation did not achieve the greatness, the highs of Sinai, didn't have that potential in their orbit, they couldn't have the potential of the terrible sin of the golden calf. There's no other nation that could have done this sin. No other nation. Only us. Only those that experienced Sinai. Joseph is an extremist. He's an outlier. And it's a little bit of Joseph within every one of us. There's a point of Joseph where we're most vulnerable to not only not achieve greatness, but to lose our stature as being ordinary, to be someone who is very shameful. And at that same point, in that same region, we can find greatness and superstardom. Joseph, he succeeded. And his stone, there's 3 of them. Because Joseph is Joseph. He's got 2 more. He's got Ephraim and Manasseh. Joseph is overrepresented in this family. But it could have been very different. And that calculus, I think, and it's an idea that we've talked about in the past, that calculus of making a choice, there's a fork in the road, and one side is greatness, and one side is the opposite. And we have to choose life or death. I just want to coast. I don't want to make a choice. No, the Torah is telling us that there's going to be situations where we're going to have to make a choice. We're going to have to make the decision. Which way, young man? That's another idea. I think a very powerful, useful idea. But let's get to the main course of this week's Parsha podcast. There is a great mystery in our Parsha. The whole Parsha is instructions to Moshe. It's a dialogue between God and Moshe. And Moshe's name does not appear. Moreover, the Torah goes out of its way, seemingly, to deliberately omit mentions of Moshe. 3 of the first 5 verses of our Parsha begin with the same word. Ve'ata, and you. Who's you? Oh, we once had a guest. I didn't really remember his first name, but he was there for a Shabbos meal. So I found all sorts of creative ways to avoid having to identify him by his first name. My father-in-law tells a story that he once, when he was a student in yeshiva, before he got married, so he once asked one of the heads of the yeshiva, "Can I eat by you maybe a Shabbos meal?" So he said yes. So he shows up, and the great rabbi's there, and he has no idea who this American kid, who he is. So he tells one of his kids, "Ask the young man what his name is." That was his solution. Ask him what his name is. The Parsha starts off, Ve'ata on you. That's the first verse. The second, the third verse starts, Ve'ata on you. The 5th verse, Ve'ata on you. It's a complete departure from the typical convention. God speaks to Moshe. God instructs Moshe. The Torah, the Parsha, studiously avoids saying Moshe's name. And you, and you, and you. What's your name again? Why does the Torah not just, as it always does, identify Moshe by name? He's having a dialogue with God. Tell us that. Now, this is a question that many of the commentators talk about, and we've spoken about it in the past as well. One of the famous answers is that this week, it always coincides with the first week of the month of Adar. And we know Moshe passed away on the 7th day of Adar. And it always falls out in this week. So this is the week that Moshe departed from us. That's going to be reflected in the Parsha. He's no longer visually in front of us. Yes, he's still there. Va'ata, va'ata. We hear about him. He still plays a role, so to speak. We know the righteous, even when they're dead, they're still deemed alive. We're still learning the Torah of Moshe. His role is still very much present within us. But there's something about him that's hidden, that's invisible. That's a famous answer. There's my favorite answer that comes courtesy of the great Kabbalist, the Megala Amukos. And it's a little bit of math, which I know doesn't translate well to the podcast, but I'll do it anyhow. Every time I do math in the podcast, I'm a little sheepish about it. Get out a pen and paper. It's easy. Jot this down. This one's not so difficult. I remember we did Parshas Bo. It was a lot of math. This one should be doable. I'll try to do it well on the podcast. There are 101 verses in our Parsha. And that is the same number as the hidden letters in Moshe's name. Now, what does that mean? We know that every letter in Hebrew has a number assigned or associated with it. So Aleph is 1, and Beis is 2, and Gimel is 3, and so on. Get to 10, goes 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100, 200, 300. The last letter, the Taf, is 400. So how do you spell the name Moshe? It's a mem, it's a shin, it's a hey. Mem is 40, shin is 300, hey is 5, 345. That's not 101. But there's a hidden gematria system. There's a hidden number in every letter. Let's figure this out. The first letter in Moshe's name is the letter Mem. Suppose the word Mem was a word. So how would you spell the word Mem? It would actually be a Mem and a Mem, because it's Mem. It's the same letter, right? It's like mom. There's 2 M's in mom. Or mum, as our friends across the pond say it. There's 2 M's in that word. So Mem, there's 2 M's. So there's 1 M, 2 M's. So the revealed letter is the first Mem, and the hidden letter, the one that doesn't appear when you write the word Moshe, it's also a Mem. How would you spell the word Shin? So the Shin, it starts with a Shin. Every letter is spelled with that letter, right? Like the word W doesn't have any W's in it. It's not like that in Hebrew. The word Shin is spelled Shin, Yud, Mem. So if we look at the letter itself, it's a Shin. But the hidden letters, the letters that are not present when you write a Shin, are a Yud and a Nun. Are you getting the system? So the hidden letter with Mem is Mem. That's 40. The hidden letter with a Shin is a Yud and a Nun. Well, what's that? A Yud is 10, a Nun is 50, plus 40, that's 100. And the letter Hey is a Hey and an Aleph, so the hidden letter is an Aleph. Thus, if you look at the hidden letter gematria of the word Moshe, it's 101. And there's 101 verses in the Parsha. So Moshe is not overtly here. It's almost like, the old pictures, you would have like a negative, right? It's like the same thing, it's just the flip side of it. The dark matter version, the hidden part of Moshe is here. Now, what does that mean? It's a fascinating concept, and I hope to write about it in this week's newsletter. What does it mean that there's a hidden letter version of something? It's there, but it's not there. Moshe, he's involved in the Parsha, but the whole Parsha is all about what he has to do to Aaron. He has to make garments for Aaron. He has to anoint Aaron. Aaron has to light the candles and kindle the incense, the ketores. Aaron has to do the whole processes of the inauguration. Everything's Aaron, but Moshe's doing it. And that's like the hidden version of Moshe. But there's a very famous answer that comes courtesy of the Baal HaTurim. And I want to focus on this answer because I think that the idea of this answer It's something that I was inculcated with from a very young age. And I find that not a lot of people have this sensitivity. So this is like a pet peeve of mine. In next week's Parsha, so now we're in Tetzaveh, next week is Tisisa. Tisisa also talks about the tabernacle, but mostly it's about the golden calf. Moshe comes down with the two tablets, and there's a golden calf. What's going on? And that story is told very quickly. He shatters the tablets, as we've spoken about in the past. And he launches into a frenzied action to try to stave off God's threat to destroy the nation. And there's multiple chapters of the aftermath of the golden calf. But Moshe said to God, if you destroy them, destroy me too. I don't want to be part of your plan. You want to make a plan to destroy the whole nation and start off from scratch with just me? No, I don't accept that. If you destroy them, you destroy me. Specifically, Moshe says, if you don't accept my prayers, mecheni na misifracha, erase me, please, from your book that you wrote. Moshe said, if you don't forgive the nation, erase me from your book. So Moshe is effectively saying the words, erase me from your book. Now, it's true that that was conditional. If you don't forgive the Jewish people, then erase me from the book. But there's a principle that whenever you say something, certainly if someone's righteous and they say something, even if there are conditions upon that, if there's a curse of the righteous, and as we shall see, even the less righteous, even though there was a condition upon it and the condition was not met, nevertheless, the curse lands. Moshe said the words, erase me from your book, and he got what he asked for. He was erased from the book, not from the whole book, but from a book, namely the book of the preceding Parsha, Parsha's Tetzaveh. That's what the Baal HaTurim says. A very famous answer, and it really comes from much earlier sources, as we shall see. Moshe said words, erase me from your book. He was erased from a part of the book, from a whole Parsha, which is a significant part of this book. Now, everyone's trying to figure out, okay, if Moshe has to be erased from one Parsha, why this one? Maybe a different one. Maybe next week's Parsha. Maybe Parshas Vayikra or Devarim, or there's lots of Parshios that Moshe has featured. Ever since the beginning of the book of Exodus, Moshe's featured every Parsha. So why this one? That's a question that many people asked. But the general idea, it's a surprising idea. Because the way we understand it, if someone says something, I will do this if, it's like a threat. Well, if that thing was not fulfilled, if the condition was not met, well, then the threat goes away as well. Moshe said to God, erase me from your book if you refuse to accept my prayer. Now, God accepted his prayer. So Moshe should not be erased from the book. But there's a principle. Curses land even when the conditions imposed upon the curse were not met. And this idea is brought down to Baal HaTurim and in some of the other earlier commentators. But really, it comes from the Zohar. And the Zohar says something unbelievable. There's no one as great as Moshe. And he said his statement as a form of prayer. He's telling God, I'm not part of this. Had Moshe said, you know what? I sign off on your plan. Let's destroy this whole nation. We'll start from scratch. I'll be the father of the new nation. That would have been accepted. Moshe didn't do that. He needed to make clear that he's not going ahead with God's plan. So he needed to say that. He needed to say, I am not accepting your proposal. And God accepted his prayer. Nevertheless, the punishment, the consequence, the curse, it landed. And I collected some sources about this idea that unintentional curses, unintentional errant curses or maledictions or statements of bad things happening, they're very dangerous. And we have to avoid ever saying things like that. And I found some sources. It's a little scary. And by the way, I omitted some. I did not include all the sources that I found. But one of the sources that I found says that if someone, God forbid, curses themselves, there are angels who are responsible to take that declaration and to implement it and to actualize it. So there's an angel who's in charge, and there's 70 other angels that help him. And they take that word, that statement, that desire for ill that a person placed upon themselves, and they say amen to it. And they actualize those plans. Now, we've had some examples in the Torah hitherto about this. You recall perhaps when Jacob was hightailing out of the home of Laban, and Laban followed in hot pursuit, and there was exactly one item that belonged to Laban that Jacob and his family had taken. And that was Rachel. She took the teraphim, which was some sort of idol of sorts. She didn't want her father to do idolatry, so she took it. And Laban went crazy and pursued them and said, "Why did you steal my God?" And chapter 31, verse 32, it tells us Jacob's response. If you find your God in the hands of anyone here, lo yichya, they will not live. And the verse ends, Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them. Rashi tells us, and that's why Rachel died before they arrived in the Holy Land. Rachel died in childbirth when Benjamin was born. Now, Laban didn't find it. So it wasn't technically fulfilled, because Jacob had said that I'm cursing whoever you find it. You find it in the hands of whoever you find it, they won't live. He never found it. Nevertheless, a curse uttered by Jacob, it landed, and that's why Rachel died. When Joseph was installed as a king, a viceroy in Egypt, and Jacob sent his sons to go procure some food, and Joseph played all sorts of games with them, and he took Shimon as a hostage, and he says, "Come back with Benjamin." Jacob did not want to release Benjamin. And Reuven, chapter 42, verse 37, Reuven said to his father, "I take responsibility. I will bring back Benjamin to you. And if not, you could kill my two sons." Now Jacob flatly refused. But Reuven said, horrible words, "Kill my two sons. Be very careful what you wish for." And the Midrash tells us, Reuven had two sons. They weren't sons, they were grandsons. They weren't grandsons, they were descendants. Dathan and Abiram. They're from the tribe of Reuven. And they died in very dramatic fashion. They joined the rebellion, the Korach rebellion, and they were swallowed up by the sinkhole. And the Midrash tells us why. Why did Reuven have two descendants, two children of his, die in that fashion? Because he said those words, don't say words that you don't want to be fulfilled. And there's some more stories here. I'm telling you, I'm skipping a lot of them because I don't want to be morbid. But this story, I don't remember this story, so I'll share it with you. I don't think I've ever shared it on the podcast because I don't remember it myself. There was one of the great sages in the Talmud. Whenever he would have, or often when he had a debate with one of his colleagues, he would say, "I'm sure I'm right, and if I'm wrong, let my children die in my lifetime." Which is a terrible thing to say, right? But he was sure he was right. But of course we know that that doesn't matter. There's many examples of him in the Talmud saying such statements. And the Talmud gives us the epilogue of that story. It tells that Rabbi Judah the Prince, after Rabbi Tarfon, who was the person who would make those oaths, after he died, Rabbi Judah the Prince once visited his hometown. And he wanted to investigate, like, what's happening with his family? Does he have any sons? So they told him he had a son, but the son died in his lifetime. He has some daughters, but only one male grandson. But he was living a very sinful life. He was really someone who, the Talmud tells us that every prostitute who would charge 2 coins for their services would hire him and pay him 8 coins. He was not someone that was living a very righteous and moral life. So Rabbi Judah the Prince summoned this young man and said, I want you to repent. And if you repent, I will give you the most prestigious woman in this country as a wife, my own daughter. Obviously, the great rabbi saw that this young man, this troubled young man, had potential to become a great person. So the Talmud says that the child repented and became very righteous. But what exactly happened? According to one opinion, he married the daughter of Rabbi Judah the Prince, but he subsequently divorced her. Alternatively, he didn't marry her because he didn't want anyone to say this is why he repented. He repented wholeheartedly. But this is cited as an example of the danger of saying things you don't want to happen, even if you are making them contingent upon something else. Don't say something that you don't want to be fulfilled. And this one I gotta tell you, this one's a really good one. There's a story in the Midrash about someone who's walking in the desert. And he was really not in a good mood. He was tired and worn out. And he started praying to God Almighty. Send me a donkey. Ve'arkavehu, which means, and I will ride it. But he said instead, ve'arkavehu, which means, and it will ride on top of me. So if you see someone who's in the desert and they're sweating and they're worn out and they're about to collapse and they want a donkey to carry, of course they don't mean they want to carry the donkey, they want the donkey to carry them. But they weren't precise in what they said. Instead of saying v'arkavehu, v'arkavehu, which means I will carry it. And indeed what happened? There was a nobleman who was traveling with their donkey, and the donkey had a little baby donkey. And the baby donkey wasn't going fast enough for this nobleman's taste. And then he sees this poor guy traveling, and he's like, okay, I want you to carry the donkey, the baby donkey, because otherwise it's slowing us down. That's the story the Midrash tells us. Same sort of idea. Be very precise in what you say. Say what you want, and don't ever say what you don't want. Okay, 2 more stories. 2 more stories. 2 of them that I did not know previously. There's a famous book written on the Mishnah called Hon Ashir, which means the bounty, the wealth of the rich person. But it has a second title. And the second title means the analysis of the pauper. Now, this book was written by a sage who lived in the early 1700s. And he wrote a book on Mishnah, and he was a very humble person. He says, this is the analysis of a pauper, someone who's not so powerful. And it was a wonderful book. But that's the title that he chose. And the other sages really loved the content of the book, but they said it's kind of a surprising title. Maybe you should reconsider the title. It's like, no, I'm a humble, I'm not so. Anyhow, he went to Italy to publish the book, and he traveled through the Mediterranean, and his ship was hijacked by pirates, and they took all his money, And they sold him as a slave in Italy, and he was redeemed by the local Jewish community, and he was left with nothing. And then he realized, no, I'm not a pauper. I'm switching the title. It's not the analysis of the pauper. This is the bounty of the rich person. And finally, it's a little bit of a funny story. It's sad. It's tragic. There was an inauguration for a very important institution in a Jewish community. The institution is something that every community has to have, but no one really wants to go there because it's a cemetery. But you have to have it because people die. I've been reliably told. People die, you got to bury them in a Jewish cemetery. So it's a Jewish community, they built a cemetery. And they did whatever they needed to do to inaugurate it. And two people started chatting. I wonder who's going to be the first person interred in the cemetery. And the other person said, I don't mind being the first one. Ooh, you don't mind being the first one? That's the way it goes. 10 days later, that guy dropped dead. Indeed, he was the first one. What the sages are trying to impress upon us. Moshe said words that he didn't want to happen. Erase me from your book. Now, yes, he said it because it was conditional. And yes, he needed to do it to gain forgiveness. True. But we don't say things that we don't want to happen. We're very careful what we wish for, even if we only wish for it under this and this condition. The Talmud tells us, Al tiftach peh. Do not open up your mouth to the Satan. Don't give him an opening to say, I could go snatch this guy, I could go punish this guy, hurt this guy. We have to be very careful with what we say. If someone says a certain prayer that orphans say, but they're not an orphan themselves, it could be very dangerous. Our sages tell us, because it could be a tacit acceptance of orphanhood. So the Kaddish Yasom, the Kaddish that an orphan says, only orphans are allowed to say it. Someone's a non-orphan, they must not say it. Because that is a way of saying, you're opening up a little window for the Satan. Oh, you want to be an orphan? Are you sure? Don't say it. Don't say things you don't want. Moshe was omitted in this week's Parsha. And why? Our sages tell us because he said, I want that. I want to be erased. But no, he added more things. Don't add more things. You add more things, that doesn't matter. There's reality that we find. We should never ever say things that we don't want to be fulfilled. And I told this is a little pet peeve of mine. Because, when people say, oh, like we're leaving, I'll never see you again. We'll never see you again. Well, God forbid. Of course I'll see them again. You're going away. You're going to college. I'll see you at the end of the semester. Oh, I can't handle it. If I'm so hungry, I'm going to die. What? Never speak like that. And this is a lesson. I think it's an important lesson. We learn it in our Parsha. If Moshe, the great Moshe, trying to save the Jewish people, there's never a better justification for saying, erase me from your book. Nevertheless, he was erased from the book. It's an important idea to make sure to always speak words that we want to see happen. Let's get to this week's dilemma. We like to end off the Parsha podcast with a dilemma. And this one may not be relevant to everyone, but it could be very, very relevant to, let's say, parents of young children or of adolescents. Kids are maturing, they're growing, and they're exploring. And they're learning about themselves and about the world. And that could be very frightening for a parent. What are they learning? Who are they talking to? Who are they meeting? What are they Googling? What do they see? Well, what are they reading? And the dilemma is what to do about it. To see or not to see. To try to catch them red-handed and berate them and castigate them. Or to ignore. I told y'all once of the story of a friend of mine. I don't remember if I told this to you. I must have said this at some point. A friend of mine who I was in yeshiva with, but this guy, there's something wrong with this guy. Not everyone in yeshiva is sterling, resplendently refined in every way. This guy was a compulsive liar. And he once told me a story that was so shocking. He liked to smoke. He was a smoker. And his father suspected that he might be smoking. His father said, "Are you a smoker?" He's like, "No, never. I'm not a smoker." So he told me that his father hired someone to go take pictures of him. And then he said to his son, "Are you a smoker?" And he says, "No, never." And he pulled out photographs like this is some sort of FBI drama. He pulled out photographs and he took pictures inside his jacket with his cigarettes. To me, that's terrible parenting. Why? You have to ignore. You gotta just make believe you never saw it. Don't look. And I think there's proof from this week's Parsha. The high priest wore 8 garments. One of them is the me'il, the robe. And on the bottom of it, there are bells and ringers. There's no way for the Kohen Gadol to be surreptitious and to sneak in on anyone. He's the high priest. He's the priest of all priests. He's the leader of the temple. He's the leader of the Jewish people. He should never, ever catch any one of his underlings red-handed. Never pounce on them. Never find them in an uncompromising way. And in fact, Aaron, the high priest, we're told in the Mishnah, he was Ohev Shalom Verodev Shalom. He was someone who loved peace and pursued peace. Ohev es Abrios, he loved humanity and brought them close to Torah. He brought them close to Torah. How did Aaron bring humanity close to Torah? So one of the great commentators, the Rabbeinu Yonah, says that Aaron would befriend people. And he would find sinners who are far from Torah. And he would befriend them. And he would treat them almost like as a friend, as a peer. And this person would say to themselves, if Aaron knew what I was doing when he wasn't watching, he would never be my friend. Let me make sure I'm living up to the standards that Aaron's holding for me. Aaron shows us what's the proper way. Not to pounce in on them. No. There's bells announcing Aaron. He can never come in when someone's not ready for him. And instead to say, I view you as special, as good, as a friend of mine, as a peer, as righteous. And then they could level up to that on their own. I think it's an important idea. It's very counterintuitive because we had a conversation with someone in the neighborhood. This is like our philosophy, and it's very terrifying to raise children, and certainly teenagers. When someone consulted with my wife, like, what to do? I found that my child did this and that, and I already punished them very severely. My wife told her, no, you have to just ignore it. You have to just swallow your tongue and ignore it. That's the proper way. Now, again, there's always exceptions to every rule, but that's the concept. We don't want to see our children or anyone in a bad light, because then we're assigning them, this is who you are. No, you're Aaron's friend. You're his peer. And that's how he will draw you close to Torah. I thank you for listening to this edition of the Parsha Podcast. It's a special edition of the Parsha Podcast because this week we're doing the fundraiser, givetorch.org. What a way to celebrate this wonderful institution, the Torch Center in Houston, Texas, and of course, everyone's favorite podcast, the Parsha Podcast. If you want to support the Parsha Podcast, you could do it. The link is in the description, givetorch.org. It brings you right to the page. Every donation is doubled. What a way to impact your generosity and your giving. This is our only annual fundraiser. So we ask you for your support again. Support our work. Givetorch.org. Every donation is doubled. I don't need to do any gimmicks with you because you're listeners of the Parsha Podcast. Givetorch.org. Have a fantastic rest of your day. Have a wonderful rest of your week. And what can I say? Put in a prayer for us that we have a successful fundraiser as well, in addition to the donation. Because, it's a rough week for us. I get home late. I leave early and I'm walking around. I told my kids I can't really deal with that until we finish the fundraiser. givetorch.org. Have a fantastic rest of your day and week. A magnificent, fantastic, splendid, uplifting Shabbos upcoming. And please God, with the help of the Almighty, we'll talk again next week. The email address is rabbiwolbe@gmail.com.